A man with nothing was offered everything for just one night of his time. 500 acres of prime farmland, enough to make him a king in a county of paupers. And all he had to do was spend a few hours with a lonely, wealthy widow. But when he looked her in the eye, he shocked everyone by asking for something worth so much more than land or gold. Something that would unravel a secret that had been buried for years and change their entire town forever. It all started on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where everything that can go wrong does. Tom Brennan was already late for a life he couldn't seem to get ahead of. His little girl Lucy, just 6 years old, stood by the rickety kitchen table. She was wearing her Sunday dress, which was really her only dress, the last clean thing she owned. On the stove, the eggs were burning. Outside, the rooster was crowing like the world was on fire. And in Lucy's small hands, there was an envelope. Tom grabbed it from her, his mind already at the lumber mill, already calculating the hours he'd have to work just to keep them fed. But the envelope stopped him cold. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind of thing you'd expect a king to use. And his name, Tom Brennan, was written across the front in a script so elegant it felt like it belonged in another world. For a man who hadn't seen a single elegant thing in 3 long years, it was like a message from a ghost. Lucy, bless her heart, tugged on his sleeve. She had the persistence of a child who knew that grown-ups, especially her papa, sometimes forgot the important things, like eating, or breathing, or paying attention to the world right in front of them. "Papa," she said, her voice soft but firm, a tone she'd picked up from watching him try to be 2 parents at once. The eggs are making that angry sound again. He was a master of multitasking, a skill born of tragedy. With one hand, he flipped the spitting eggs. With the other, he tore open the fancy envelope. It was a dance he'd perfected ever since his wife, Martha, had been taken from them, leaving him with a little girl full of questions he couldn't answer, and a hole in his heart the size of the sky. The letter inside was short, written in that same beautiful hand. It was a request, an invitation. Mrs. Alina Hartwell requested his presence at Hartwell Manor. That very evening, she wanted to discuss a business proposition. A proposition, she wrote, that would benefit them both. She'd heard of his circumstances, the letter said, and she believed she could offer him an opportunity that would change his daughter's future forever. Tom read it once, then twice. Lucy, meanwhile, was arranging her slightly burnt eggs into a smiley face on her plate, humming a little tune. It was the song Martha used to sing when she braided Lucy's hair. Every time he heard it, it felt like a fist clenching around his heart. But he'd learned to just breathe through it. He had to, because Lucy needed her mother's songs, even if they were tearing him apart piece by piece. Alina Hartwell. The name was a legend in their part of the country, the wealthiest widow in 3 counties. Her husband had left her a fortune so vast it was almost mythical. She lived all alone up on the hill, in a mansion that stared down at the valley like a queen looking at her subjects. And everyone in the little town of Millbrook whispered her name with that toxic cocktail of awe and envy. She was a woman who could buy their whole town and not even notice the dent in her bank account. "What's that paper say, Papa?" Lucy asked, her mouth full of egg. Her eyes, Martha's eyes, were watching him. She'd learned to read his moods like a farmer reads the weather, and she knew a storm was brewing behind his calm face. Tom folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. It rested right over his heart, right next to the last letter Martha had ever written him, its edges worn soft and thin from 3 years of being touched, of being read and reread in the dead of night. "Just business, sweetheart," he lied. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Lucy knew. Her expression told him she didn't believe him for a second. She was smart, just like her mother. Too smart for her own good sometimes. He knew this letter wasn't just business. You don't get a letter on paper that costs more than your weekly wages for just business. Something was wrong, or something was about to change in a way he couldn't possibly predict. The walk to the schoolhouse was a daily reminder of everything he didn't have. It took them right past the edge of the Hartwell estate, and Tom couldn't help but stare at the massive, imposing iron gates. They weren't just gates. They were a statement, a declaration that separated her world from his. Beyond them, the mansion was a palace of white columns and windows that gleamed like diamonds in the morning sun. The gardens alone probably cost more to keep up than he earned in a whole year of breaking his back at the lumber mill. Lucy skipped along beside him, her little voice a constant stream of chatter about her friend Annie's new doll. She told him how she'd informed Annie that dolls were for babies, but Tom heard what she wasn't saying. He heard the deep, secret longing in her voice. It was the careful way she talked around the things she wanted, the things she knew they couldn't afford. His chest tightened with that old, familiar ache. It was the pain of a father who couldn't give his daughter the childhood she deserved. Mrs. Patterson says if I keep working hard at my letters, I might be smart enough for the academy in Carson City someday, Lucy said, her voice a fragile mix of hope and doubt. It was the sound of a child who had learned too early that dreams were dangerous things. Hold them too tight, and they might just break your heart. Tom knelt right there on the dusty road and straightened the ribbon in her hair. It was frayed and faded, but she'd insisted on wearing it. You're already smart enough for anywhere you want to go, little bird, he said, his voice thick. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different. She threw her little arms around his neck, hugging him with a fierce love that spoke volumes. She knew her father was fighting battles she couldn't see, and he held her tight, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine that always clung to her hair, trying to draw strength from it. The day at the lumber mill was torture. Time seemed to stretch and crawl, every minute measured in worry and doubt. He loaded wagons, he cut boards, his body went through the motions, but his mind was up on that hill, in that mansion, trying to figure out Alina Hartwell's game. What kind of business proposition could possibly involve a man who owned nothing but the calluses on his hands and a mountain of debt? The other men at the mill joked and talked about their plans for the weekend, about a dance, and the girls they hoped to meet. But their easy chatter felt a million miles away. Tom had been alone for 3 years now. Loneliness wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a part of him, as familiar as his own skin. When the sun finally began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, Tom walked up the winding path to Hartwell Manor. He'd put on his best shirt, though it was threadbare at the collar, and polished his boots until he could almost see his reflection. He felt like a beggar approaching a king's throne. The man who answered the door was a butler, thin and severe, with a face that looked like it had been carved from a sour lemon. He looked at Tom's simple clothes with an expression of pure disdain, like he was looking at something unpleasant he'd stepped in. Tom immediately felt like he didn't belong, which was probably the point. Mrs. Hartwell is waiting in the drawing room, the butler said, his voice as warm as a January frost. Please follow me, and try not to touch anything. The drawing room wasn't just a room, it was a cavern of wealth. It was bigger than Tom's entire 2-room cabin, filled with gleaming furniture that probably cost more than he'd make in a decade. And there she was. Alina Hartwell. She sat by the massive stone fireplace like a queen on her throne, her silver hair coiled perfectly, a dress the color of a midnight sky clinging to her frame. The dress alone was probably worth more than his horse. She was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that money creates. Perfectly preserved, elegantly dressed, surrounded by a soft cushion of luxury that smoothed away the hard edges of life. But her eyes held something he recognized instantly. It was a loneliness so deep and so vast that all the money in the world couldn't fill it. It was the same loneliness he saw in his own reflection every morning. Mr. Brennan, she said, her voice smooth as silk as she rose with a practiced grace. Thank you for coming. Please sit. Tom perched on the very edge of a velvet chair that felt like it might swallow him whole. He folded his rough hands in his lap, determined to stay quiet until he understood the rules of whatever game they were about to play. Alina poured a glass of deep red wine from a crystal decanter that shattered the firelight into 1,000 tiny stars. She offered him a glass, but he shook his head. He needed his wits about him. He had a feeling he was about to need them more than he ever had before. I'll be direct, Mr. Brennan, she began, her eyes locking onto his. I believe directness saves time and prevents misunderstandings. I am a widow. My husband passed 5 years ago. He left me very well provided for. She paused, a bitter little smile touching her lips. But comfort and companionship are two very different things. She let that hang in the air, studying his face, trying to read him. I am offering you 500 acres of prime farmland, the stretch just south of Miller's Creek. It is yours free and clear. She paused again, and then delivered the final, shocking line. In exchange for one night of your company. The words hit him like a physical blow. 500 acres. That wasn't just land, it was a new life. It was a future. It meant Lucy could have new dresses, a real education, a warm house that didn't leak every time it rained. She could have the dolls she pretended not to want and the books she devoured like she was starving. It was everything he'd ever dreamed of giving his daughter. But there was a catch. There was always a catch. Ma'am, Tom said, his voice surprisingly steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. That's an incredible offer. But I have to ask, what exactly are you expecting from this night of companionship? Alina's smile was sad now and knowing. It was the smile of a woman who understood that everything in this world had a price tag, and most people were more than willing to pay it. I'm expecting dinner conversation, she said, her voice soft but clear, with someone who sees me as a person, not a bank. I'm expecting to dance to music that isn't just an echo in an empty ballroom. I'm expecting to remember what it feels like to have someone say goodnight and actually mean it. Her voice was laced with the ache of 5 years of crushing silence, of being surrounded by servants paid to be polite and neighbors who only visited when they wanted something. I'm not asking you to love me, Mr. Brennan. I'm asking you to help me remember what it felt like to be alive instead of just existing. The fire crackled in the heavy silence. The weight of the decision settled on Tom's shoulders like a physical thing. 500 acres. A kingdom for his daughter. All for one night. But Tom had learned a long time ago, the hardest way possible, that some prices were far too high. And he looked at this lonely, beautiful woman, and he knew this was one of them, because he saw the desperation in her eyes and something else, something that felt like a trap. Mrs. Hartwell, he said slowly, carefully, his voice carrying the quiet strength he'd scraped together over 3 years of raising a child alone. I appreciate your offer more than you can possibly know. 500 acres. It would change my daughter's life in ways I can barely imagine. He took a breath. But I can't accept it. For the first time since he'd walked in, Alina's perfect composure cracked. Just a little. A flicker of disbelief, of pure shock, flashed across her elegant features. It was like seeing lightning in a clear summer sky. You're refusing? She asked, her voice laced with an astonishment that told him no one had ever said no to her before. Mr. Brennan, perhaps you don't understand. This is 500 acres of the best farmland in this county. It is enough to make you a wealthy man, to give your daughter everything she could ever want. Tom stood up. His hands, which had been trembling just a moment before, were now perfectly steady. He felt a strange sense of clarity, of purpose. Ma'am, I understand exactly what you're offering, and I understand what you're asking for in return. He met her shocked gaze. But what I want to ask you is something different. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the cavernous room. Would you consider letting me court you properly instead? The silence that followed was absolute, so complete, Tom could hear the frantic drumming of his own heart. Alina Hartwell just stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, as if he'd just started speaking in a language from another planet. The idea that someone might want her company without a price tag attached seemed to be something her mind couldn't quite compute. Her wine glass trembled in her hand, the crystal chiming softly against her rings. And in that moment, Tom saw past the dress, past the mansion, past the mountain of money. He saw the real woman underneath. A woman so lonely, so vulnerable, and so utterly stunned by a simple, genuine act of kindness that she was completely lost. You want to court me? She finally whispered, the words barely audible. You're refusing 500 acres of land to ask if you can court me? Tom gave a single, firm nod, his eyes never leaving hers, holding her gaze with a steady, unwavering honesty. Yes, ma'am, he said, his voice quiet but full of a conviction that surprised even himself. That's exactly what I'm asking. But then the look in her eyes changed. The surprise was replaced by something else. Fear. And a flicker of something that looked like calculation. He suddenly had the chilling feeling that this wasn't just about loneliness. He had just walked into a test, and he had no idea if he had passed or failed. Elena set her wineglass down with a hand that was visibly shaking. The crystal made a sharp clink against the marble table, a sound that echoed in the vast, silent room like a warning bell. She walked over to the tall window that looked out over her perfect, manicured gardens, turning her back to him. Her silhouette was framed against the last dying light of the evening. Tom could see the rigid, tense line of her shoulders. She was holding herself together by a thread. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice carefully controlled, scrubbed clean of any emotion. It was the voice of a woman who had spent years building walls around her heart. "I think you misunderstand the nature of my offer. This isn't about romance, it's not about courtship, or any of the other pretty words people use to disguise their needs. This is a business arrangement, pure and simple." But he heard it. Beneath the cold, precise words, he heard a tremor. Her voice had caught, just for a second, on the word loneliness. She had revealed more than she'd intended. Tom moved closer, not crowding her, but stepping into her orbit. "With all due respect, Mrs. Hartwell, I think you're the one who misunderstands," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You call it business, but business doesn't make your hands shake when you pour a glass of wine. Business doesn't make you stare out a window like you're looking for a ghost. You're offering me a kingdom, not because you need a business partner. You're offering it because the silence in this house is so loud it's eating you alive, and you think buying a man is safer than risking your heart." Her reflection in the dark glass was a portrait of a woman torn in two. He could see the war raging inside her, the safety of her golden cage versus the terrifying possibility of letting someone, anyone, truly see her. "You don't know the first thing about my life," she shot back, but there was no fire in it. It was the weak protest of someone arguing against something they desperately wanted to believe. "You don't know what it's like to wake up in a house so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat, to eat every meal alone, to have everyone who looks at you see only dollar signs." Her words started coming faster now, a torrent of suppressed pain breaking through the dam she'd so carefully constructed. "And you certainly don't know about my husband's will." Tom froze. "His will?" She turned from the window then, her mask of composure finally crumbling away, revealing the raw, wounded woman beneath. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Frederick was complicated. He loved me, but he was a man who loved games. Tests." She took a shaky breath. "His will stipulates that if I do not remarry within 5 years of his death, the majority of the Hartwell estate, including this house, passes to his nephew Marcus." Tom's mind was reeling. This wasn't about loneliness at all. This was about survival. "And when is the deadline?" he asked, already dreading the answer. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a desperate, cornered fear. "Next month." Now it all made a horrifying kind of sense. The urgency, the extravagant offer, the business proposition. It wasn't a proposition, it was a desperate gamble. A test to find a man, any man, who wasn't just after her fortune before she lost everything to this mysterious nephew. He hadn't just stumbled into a rich woman's fantasy. He'd walked into a high-stakes chess match where she was about to be checkmated, and she saw him as a potential pawn. His heart sank. So his instinct was right. This wasn't about him. It wasn't about a real connection. It was about a deadline, about a loophole in a dead man's will. "So you're looking for a husband," Tom said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, "and you thought you could buy one with 500 acres of land." "I thought I could find someone honorable," she cried, the words tearing from her throat. "Someone who could see past the money. I thought, I hoped, that a man like you, a man with a child to care for, would understand value beyond dollars and cents. But you're just like the rest of them, aren't you? You hear will and nephew, and you see your own angle." "No," Tom said, his voice cutting through her panic. "That's not what I see at all. I see a woman who is so afraid of losing her home that she's willing to sell a piece of her soul to keep it. I see a woman who has been so betrayed by the people around her that she can't recognize honesty when it's standing right in front of her. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. I'll ask you again, Alina, he said, using her first name, a deliberate, intimate move. Forget the will. Forget the nephew and the deadline. Let me court you, not to save your inheritance, but to save you from this crushing loneliness that's going to be here whether you keep this house or not. Let me show you that not everything has a price. She stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. He had called her bluff, seen through the desperate game to the terrified woman at its center. Her entire future was hanging by a thread, and a poor lumberjack she'd met only an hour ago was offering her not a business deal, but something far more dangerous. Hope. Suddenly, a cold voice cut through the tension from the doorway. Well, well, it seems my dear aunt is entertaining. Tom and Alina spun around. Leaning against the doorframe was a young man, impeccably dressed in a suit that cost more than Tom made in 6 months. He had a cruel, handsome face and a smirk that was dripping with arrogance. Marcus, Alina breathed, all the color draining from her face. Marcus's cold eyes swept over Tom, dismissing him as nothing more than dirt on the carpet. Then he looked at Alina, his smirk widening. Running out of time, are we, Aunt Alina? Getting desperate. I must say this is a new low, even for you. Trawling the local lumber mills for a husband? How utterly pathetic. The air in the room went ice cold. Marcus pushed himself off the door frame and sauntered into the room, moving with the lazy confidence of a predator who owned the territory. He circled Tom like a wolf sizing up a sheep, his eyes filled with a mixture of amusement and contempt. So this is the best you could do? Marcus said, his voice a low, mocking drawl. He didn't even look at Tom, addressing all his words to Alina, as if Tom wasn't even there. A man who smells of sawdust and desperation. I'm almost insulted. Get out of my house, Marcus, Alina said, her voice trembling, but trying to hold on to a shred of authority. Your house? Marcus laughed, a short, ugly sound. For now, but the clock is ticking, isn't it, Auntie? Tick-tock. Tick-tock. He finally turned his venomous gaze on Tom. I don't know what she's offered you, but I'll double it. In cash. All you have to do is walk out that door and never come back. Tom felt a surge of cold fury. This man, this boy, thought he could buy and sell people like cattle. Tom looked from Marcus's smug face to Alina's terrified one. He saw now that her problem wasn't just a deadline and a will. Her problem was a monster in her own family. My name is Tom Brennan, Tom said, his voice quiet but hard as steel. And I'm not for sale. Marcus's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine surprise, then anger. You're making a very big mistake, lumberjack. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm dealing with a coward who threatens a woman to get what he wants, Tom said, taking a deliberate step forward, placing himself between Marcus and Alina. You want this house? You want this money? Then you'll have to go through me. For a second, Tom thought Marcus might actually swing at him. The younger man's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. But then the butler, the severe, sour-faced man from the door, appeared as if from nowhere. His name was Alistair. Mr. Marcus, Alistair said, his voice perfectly level, yet carrying an unmistakable threat. I believe Mrs. Hartwell asked you to leave. Marcus shot a look of pure hatred at the butler, then at Tom. This isn't over, he hissed. Enjoy your little fantasy, it won't last. And with that, he turned and stormed out of the room, the sound of the front door slamming shut echoing like a gunshot. The moment he was gone, Alina seemed to collapse. She stumbled back and sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. The strong, composed queen of the manor was gone, replaced by a terrified, shaking woman. Tom knelt beside her chair. Alina, it's all right. He's gone. You don't understand, she sobbed into her hands. He's not just a spoiled boy. He's cruel. He's been tormenting me for years waiting for this. He sabotages anyone who gets close to me. He spreads rumors, he threatens them. No one will stand up to him. I will, Tom said simply. She looked up at him then, her eyes swimming with tears and a fragile, dawning hope. Why? Why would you do this? You don't even know me. You could have taken his money and walked away. You could have taken my land. Why are you choosing this fight? Tom thought of Lucy, of the lessons he was trying to teach her about right and wrong, about standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. He thought of Martha and how she'd always believed in the inherent goodness of people, even when the world showed them its ugliest side. Because some things are worth fighting for, he said softly, and because that boy looked at you with hate, but he looked at me with something worse. He looked at me like I was nothing, and I've spent the last 3 years feeling like nothing. Tonight you made me feel like something more, and I'm not going to let him take that from you or from me. As he spoke, he glanced around the room, and his eyes landed on a small leather-bound book of poems sitting on a side table. It was unremarkable, except for one thing. It was the exact same volume of poetry he'd given Martha on their first anniversary. He'd saved for months to buy it. He'd never seen another copy. A strange feeling, a prickle of unease crawled up his spine. It was probably just a coincidence. A popular book, maybe. But standing in this house with its lonely mistress and her venomous nephew, and the strange clauses in a dead man's will, it felt like something else. It felt like a clue. Like a thread in a tapestry he was only just beginning to see the pattern of. The feeling that he had stumbled into something far bigger than a simple inheritance dispute began to grow. This wasn't just Alina's story. Somehow he was starting to think it might be his too. Alistair, the butler, cleared his throat from the doorway. He was holding a tray with a steaming teapot and 2 cups. His sour expression had been replaced by something else. Something Tom couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe. I took the liberty of preparing some tea, madam, he said to Alina. Then he looked directly at Tom. And for you, Mr. Brennan, I imagine the evening has been taxing. As he set the tray down, his eyes met Tom's. There was a silent communication there, an understanding. Alistair wasn't just a butler, he was a guardian, a protector, and he had just seen Tom prove himself. Thank you, Alistair, Alina said, her voice still shaky as she accepted a cup. Tom took his. Alistair, he said, looking at the older man, that book of poems on the table, may I ask where it came from? Alistair's gaze flickered to the book, and a shadow of memory passed over his face. An old thing. It belonged to a former staff member, a young maid. She left it behind when she departed some years ago. A sweet girl. A terrible shame. What happened to her? What happened to her? Tom pressed, his heart starting to beat a little faster. Mr. Marcus, Alistair said, his voice dropping, tight with old anger. He had her dismissed on some trumped-up charge of theft. We all knew it was a lie. The girl was as honest as the day is long. But Mr. Marcus has a talent for persuasion. His uncle, Mr. Hartwell, was away on business. By the time he returned and learned the truth, the girl was long gone. A cold dread was beginning to pool in Tom's stomach. A dread so specific and so terrifying, he could barely bring himself to ask the next question. Alistair, do you remember her name? The butler paused, his brow furrowed in thought. It was a common name, but I remember it because she had such a kind heart. Martha. Her name was Martha. The teacup slipped from Tom's fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was like an explosion in the silent room. Alina gasped. Alistair stared, but Tom couldn't hear them. All he could hear was a roaring in his ears. Martha. His Martha. She had worked here in this house of secrets and lies. She had never told him. In all their years together, she had never once mentioned working at Hartwell Manor. Why? Why would she hide something like that from him? And then the pieces began to click into place, forming a picture so ugly and so painful he could barely look at it. Marcus hadn't just fired a random maid. He had fired his wife, the mother of his child. And the story she had told him, that she'd left a difficult job in Carson City because she missed her family, had been a lie to protect him, or a lie to hide her shame. He looked at Alina, really looked at her, and saw it. The faint scar above her eyebrow, from a riding accident she'd once told a reporter about. Martha had told him a story once, about a kind but sad mistress who had taken a fall from a horse, and how she'd sat by her bedside reading poetry to her until she was well. The same book of poems that was sitting 10 feet away from him. It wasn't a coincidence. None of it was. He hadn't been chosen at random. The mutual acquaintances who had told Alina of his circumstances. It must have been Alastair. Or maybe even Frederick Hartwell himself before he died, setting some long, intricate plan in motion. Mr. Brennan? Tom? Are you all right? Alina was kneeling in front of him now, her face a mask of concern, her hands on his arms. He couldn't speak. He just stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of betrayal and revelation. His entire life, his entire history with the woman he had loved and lost, had a secret chapter he never knew existed. And it was written in this house. The feud with Marcus wasn't just about protecting Alina anymore. It was personal. It was about avenging his wife. And he realized Marcus had no idea who he was. He had no idea that the poor, insignificant lumberjack he threatened was the husband of the girl whose life he had ruined years ago. Tom now held a secret weapon, and he was going to use it to burn Marcus's world to the ground. I need to go, Tom said, his voice hoarse. He pushed himself to his feet, his mind racing. He had to get home. He had to look through Martha's things, a box of her old keepsakes tucked away in the attic. He'd never been able to bring himself to open it. Now he had to. There had to be something in there. A letter, a diary, some proof of what Marcus had done. Tom, wait, Alina pleaded, rising with him. What is it? What did Alistair say that upset you so much? He couldn't tell her. Not yet. He couldn't dump this on her, this tangled, painful connection between their pasts. It would only frighten her more. And besides, this was his fight now. His and Martha's. It's nothing, he lied, hating the word as it left his mouth. It's just a lot to take in. I need some air. I need to check on Lucy. He could see the hurt and confusion in her eyes, but she nodded. Will you come back? She asked, her voice small, vulnerable. Tomorrow? I will, he promised, and he meant it. He wasn't running away. He was going to find his ammunition. Tomorrow, we'll talk more. Alistair showed him to the door, his face grim. Mr. Brennan, the butler said quietly as Tom stepped out into the cool night air. Frederick Hartwell was a good man. He knew what his nephew was. He tried to make amends, but he ran out of time. He left certain instructions. Should the son of James Brennan ever find his way here? Tom stopped, his hand on the door. His father, James Brennan, had done some work on the estate years ago. He remembered now, a vague childhood memory of his father talking about the kind Mr. Hartwell. What instructions? Tom asked. He instructed me to watch over you, to tell his wife upon his death of the honorable family living in the valley. He believed that good men were hard to find, and that his wife would need one when he was gone. He trusted that character, like a strong river, runs true through generations. He was counting on you, Mr. Brennan, long before you ever knew it. Tom walked away from the mansion in a daze. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a plan. A dead man's last desperate attempt to protect his wife and right an old wrong, all resting on the shoulders of a man he barely knew, his father's son. The weight of it was staggering. He practically ran back to his small cabin. Lucy was sound asleep, her face peaceful in the moonlight streaming through the window. He stood over her for a long moment, his heart aching. She looked so much like her mother. He was fighting for her future, but he was also fighting for her mother's past. He climbed the rickety ladder to the small attic, dust motes dancing in the beam of his lantern. In the corner, under an old blanket, was a small wooden chest. Martha's memory box. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside were the small, precious things that made up a life. Dried flowers, a ribbon from her hair, a photograph of them on their wedding day. And at the very bottom, a small, cloth-bound journal. He'd never seen it before. He sat on the dusty floor and opened it. The first page was dated 7 years ago, a year before he'd even met her. Her handwriting, so familiar it made his throat ache, filled the page, and the first line made his blood run cold. Another day at Hartwell Manor. Mrs. H is kind, but so sad. I fear for her. Her husband is a good man, but his nephew Marcus is a snake in the garden. I saw him today in the study, altering the account books. I know he is stealing from his uncle. But what can I do? I am just a maid. If I speak up, he will destroy me. Tom read on, his hands shaking with rage. Page after page detailed Marcus's cruelty, his thefts, his lies. Martha had seen it all. She had documented everything. The final entry was a hurried, panicked scrawl. He knows. Marcus knows I saw the ledgers. He cornered me in the hallway. He said if I ever breathed a word to his uncle, he would not only have me fired, but he would ruin my family's name. He would ensure my father never worked in this county again. He called me a filthy little nobody who could be crushed without a thought. I have to leave. I have to run. I am so scared. I have the real ledger page hidden, but I am so afraid to use it. Tom's eyes scanned the attic. Where? Where would she hide something so important? His gaze fell upon the wooden chest itself. He ran his fingers along the inside, feeling for a loose board, a hidden compartment, and then he found it, a false bottom. Prying it open, he found a single folded sheet of paper. It was a page torn from a ledger book. Columns of numbers, and at the bottom, in Frederick Hartwell's distinctive signature, a note scrawled to his accountant, questioning the very figures Marcus had falsified. And tucked inside the folded page was a small pressed flower, a forget-me-not. He had it. The proof. The weapon Martha had been too afraid to use. Marcus hadn't just threatened a maid, he had committed fraud. He had stolen from his own family, and Tom was holding the evidence in his hands. The game had just changed. Marcus thought he was fighting a poor lumberjack for an inheritance. He had no idea he was about to face a ghost. The next morning, Tom arrived at Hartwell Manor, not with a fishing pole, but with a purpose. He found Alina in the garden, listlessly snipping at her roses, the shadows under her eyes telling him she hadn't slept. Tom, she said, relief washing over her face when she saw him. I was so worried. We need to talk, he said, his voice grim. And Alistair needs to be here. The three of them gathered in the drawing room, the same room where his life had been turned upside down less than 24 hours before. The air was thick with tension. Tom laid Martha's journal and the ledger page on the polished table. My late wife was named Martha, he began, his voice low and steady. 7 years ago, she worked in this house as a maid. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Alistair simply nodded, his face a grim mask. He already knew, or at least he'd suspected. She left because your nephew Marcus fired her, Tom continued, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He fired her because she caught him stealing from your husband. She documented everything in her journal, and she kept this. He pushed the ledger page toward them. This is the proof that Marcus has been a thief and a liar for years. This is the weapon that will save you, Elena. Elena stared at the page, then at the journal, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and dawning understanding. The maid, the sweet girl with the poetry book, that was your Martha? Oh, Tom, I am so sorry. Tears welled in her eyes. Frederick knew. He found out after she was gone, but Marcus had covered his tracks so well, and Frederick couldn't find her to make amends. He lived with that guilt until the day he died. It's why he put that clause in the will. It wasn't a game. It was a test of my character. He wanted me to find someone worthy, someone honorable, to share my life with. He wanted me to find someone like you. And now we have the means to stop Marcus for good, Alistair said, his voice hard. The family lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, holds the final authority on the execution of the will. If we present this to him, Marcus will not only be disinherited, he could face criminal charges. But Tom shook his head. No, not yet. Marcus is arrogant. He thinks he's already won. If we just go to the lawyer, he'll find a way to wriggle out of it, to paint me as an opportunist, to paint Martha as a disgruntled employee. We need to trap him. We need him to expose himself. How? Alina asked, her voice a whisper. We play his game, Tom said, a plan forming in his mind, sharp and clear. We're going to announce our engagement. Elena's eyes widened. Our engagement? It's the only way. It will force his hand. It will make him reckless. He'll come at me, at us, with everything he's got, And when he does, we'll be ready for him. We'll let him walk right into the trap, and Mr. Abernathy will be there to witness it all. It was a dangerous, audacious plan. They would be putting a target on their own backs, but it was the only way to ensure Marcus couldn't slip away. It was the only way to get justice, for Elena and for Martha. All right, Elena said, a new strength in her voice. The fear was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. Let's set a trap for a snake. The news of their engagement spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The wealthy widow Elena Hartwell and the poor lumberjack Tom Brennan. It was the talk of the town, a scandal and a fairy tale all rolled into one. Just as Tom predicted, the news sent Marcus into a rage. He didn't wait long. That very evening, as Tom was walking home from the mill, two burly men stepped out of the shadows. They weren't from Millbrook. They had the hard, cruel faces of men who were paid to hurt people. "Mr. Brennan," one of them growled, "Mr. Marcus sends his regards. He wants you to understand that some things are out of your league. He suggests you end your arrangement with his aunt immediately." Tom's heart hammered in his chest, but he stood his ground. "You can tell Marcus I'm not scared of him or his hired thugs." The man chuckled, a low, nasty sound. "That's a shame." They came at him fast. Tom was strong from years of physical labor, and he fought back with a desperate fury. He managed to land a solid punch on one of them, but there were two of them, and they were professionals. A fist caught him in the gut, driving the air from his lungs. Another blow glanced off his temple, and the world exploded in stars. He fell to his knees, tasting blood. "This is your last warning," the man said, standing over him. "Next time, we won't be so gentle. And maybe we'll pay a visit to that pretty little girl of yours." The threat, the mention of Lucy, cut through the pain. A primal, protective rage surged through him. He lunged from the ground, tackling the man at the knees, but the other one kicked him hard in the ribs. Pain shot through his side, sharp and blinding. He collapsed, gasping. The men laughed and walked away, melting back into the shadows. Tom lay in the dirt for a long time, every breath a fresh wave of agony. He had known Marcus was cruel, but he had underestimated his depravity. This wasn't just about money anymore. Marcus was willing to kill for it, and he had just threatened the one thing in the world Tom couldn't bear to lose. Lucy. He staggered home, his body a symphony of pain. He had to end this. Now! The trap had to be sprung, before Marcus could make good on his threat. When Tom stumbled through the door of Hartwell Manor, bruised and bleeding, Elena cried out in horror. Alistair's face turned to stone. "He threatened Lucy," Tom rasped, leaning against the wall for support. "It's over. We're ending this tonight." Alistair immediately went to the telephone to summon Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer, telling him it was an absolute emergency regarding the Hartwell estate. Elena, her hands shaking, tended to Tom's cuts, her tears falling onto his bruised face. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I've brought this danger to you, to your daughter." "No," Tom said, gripping her hand. "This started a long time ago. We're just finishing it." An hour later, Mr. Abernathy arrived, a stern, white-haired man with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Tom, Elena, and Alistair laid out the whole story. They showed him Martha's journal. They showed him the ledger page. The lawyer's face grew grimmer with every word. "This is damning," Abernathy said, his voice grave. "But you are right, Mr. Brennan. Marcus is slippery. A confession, witnessed, would be ironclad." Just then, the front doors of the manor burst open and Marcus stormed in, his face contorted in a mask of fury. He had clearly heard that the lawyer had been summoned and came to do damage control. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his eyes flashing. "What lies has this gold digger been telling you?" He pointed a shaking finger at Tom. "It's over, Marcus," Elena said, her voice clear and strong. She stood beside Tom, no longer afraid. "Over?" Marcus laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. "It's just beginning. You think you can cheat me out of my birthright with this nobody? I will burn this whole estate to the ground before I let him have it." "Your birthright?" Tom said, stepping forward, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. "You mean the money you've been stealing from your family for years?" Marcus froze. "What are you talking about?" Tom held up Martha's journal. I'm talking about a maid named Martha, a girl you fired to cover up your crimes, a girl whose life you ruined. Marcus's face went pale. For the first time, Tom saw genuine fear in his eyes. You're lying. That's, that's impossible. Is it? Tom said, his voice like ice. He pulled the ledger page from his pocket and held it up. Or is this impossible? Your uncle's own handwriting, questioning your bookkeeping. The very page you thought you had destroyed. The sight of the paper broke him. The arrogance, the confidence, it all shattered, leaving behind the terrified, cornered rat he truly was. She was a nobody, Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking. A little servant girl who got what she deserved. I should have destroyed her then. Just like I'll destroy you. I'll kill you both. That inheritance is mine. He lunged, not at Tom, but at Alina, his hands outstretched like claws. But he never reached her. Tom moved faster than he thought possible, the pain forgotten, and slammed his fist into Marcus's jaw. The crack echoed through the room as Marcus crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Silence. Then Mr. Abernathy spoke, his voice ringing with grim finality. I believe I have heard everything I need to hear. I have witnessed a confession and a physical assault. Marcus Hartwell, you are finished. Justice. It had been a long time coming, but it had finally arrived, carried on the back of a dead woman's courage and a living man's love. In the weeks that followed, the legalities were sorted out. Marcus was completely disinherited, his threats and confession ensuring he would never see a dime of the Hartwell fortune. Facing charges of fraud and assault, he fled the county, a disgraced coward. The cloud of fear that had hung over Hartwell Manor for years finally lifted. The great house, once a silent, lonely prison, began to fill with laughter. Lucy's laughter. She spent her days exploring the gardens with Alina, chasing butterflies, and filling the long hallways with the sound of her happy chatter. Tom and Elena didn't rush. They took their time, building their new life one day at a time, just as he had promised. They took Lucy fishing at Miller's Creek. They had picnics under the willow trees. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the stars come out, their hands intertwined. It wasn't a whirlwind romance born of desperation, but a deep, quiet love built on a foundation of honesty, courage, and shared healing. One sunny afternoon, Tom stood with Alina on a hill overlooking the 500 acres she had once offered him. It's still yours, you know, she said softly. A gift, for you and Lucy, to build the life you deserve. Tom smiled and shook his head. It's not for us, he said. He pointed to a spot near the creek. That's where we'll build it. The Martha Brennan Academy, a school for the children of this valley, a place where they can learn and dream, no matter how much money their parents have. He looked at her, his heart full. Her legacy won't be a story of fear and sadness. It will be one of hope. That's the real treasure. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. She looked at this incredible man, this man who had been offered a fortune and chose honor instead, who had been given every reason to hate but chose to build something beautiful. She knew then that her late husband's plan, his final, desperate gambit, had worked. He had led her to the best man in the valley, a man whose love was worth more than all the land and all the gold in the world. Together, the three of them, Tom, Elena, and Lucy, had done more than just save an inheritance. They had built a family, a real family, forged in truth and courage, destined for a future filled with pancakes on Sunday mornings, stories read by the fire, and a love that had truly conquered all. If this story about a father's love and a secret from the past touched your heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we have in store for you. And let me know in the comments, did you see the twist about Martha coming? We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay safe and remember that the best things in life are never for sale.